Welcome to another episode of The Growth Compass. Shout out to our sponsor senders. If you want to do cold email deliverability correctly, you hit the link in the description. But without them, it would not be possible to interview really interesting, cool people like Matt. What's going on?
And thanks for having me on, Blake. Really excited.
Absolutely. And some of these people tuning in might know already. And some of them might not, but you've been doing some really interesting things, building a really interesting product from personal experience. And I'm excited to hear how you describe it. So to start, if you could just give a brief introduction of yourself and what you're building.
Yeah, Matt Forbush, based out of Memphis, Tennessee. And what we have previously called Zignyl, we're in a name change right now. We're changing it to Ziggy AI. And it's
Nice.
a employee performance platform and management platform for consumer facing businesses, where effectively our focus is what can we do to take those hourly employees, deskless workers, and help them engage with the customers better and represent the business better based off of empirical data, and in a way that ultimately helps reward both of them from a payment standpoint and from the business performance simultaneously.
Awesome. So before we get into your experience growing it, starting it, where you're at now, stuff like that, I'm curious, high level overview, how long would you say, or would you describe that you've been working on this?
Well, 20 years in some respects.
Well, there you go.
And I say that because I started this for my businesses first and foremost. I'm a franchisee for Annie Ann's and grown from one to now I'm in a partnership with a partner of mine where we have, I think, about 45 and did about 30 million in revenue
Wow.
last year. And that's largely been on the back of the philosophy that's underlying with Zignyl, right? From the software, so the psychology behind it, I've been working on it from day one in the franchise industry. But we built this for my stores first and foremost, solving our own problems, and it worked pretty well. Other franchisees started asking about it, so we decided, let's commercialize it. I am now silent in the franchisee as far as the owner capacity. I'm still a silent partner in that, and spend 100% of my times with Ziggy. So it's a blurry area, but we started writing the code for Ziggy about 5 years ago, I guess would be the best way to answer your
Okay,
question.
great. Well, okay, so let's go then back to the decision to start the first franchise. So was that what were you doing beforehand? How did you end up in a position where you were like, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to do, run my own business type of thing?
Yeah. Growing up, my brother owned some mailboxes, et cetera, at the time. So he was franchising. So I kind of grew up under his wing a little bit and learned from him. He actually owned some Annie Ann's franchises himself back in East Tennessee.
Runs in the family, I
Which
guess.
is called, yeah, the Annie Ann's pretzel. So, went to school at Clemson in South Carolina. Actually played football there. And then my first job after graduating was I knew I wanted at that point to get into franchising because I knew I wanted to own my own business. And franchising is the relatively most safe way, I think, to own your own business because you're at least getting a proven business model, not starting up Matt's hot dog stand or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So loosely more security than most startups and business owners. Anyway, first job after college was working the drive-through at Chick-fil-A, literally learning a lot from 16-year-old kids in the drive-through. Because if I was going to get into the industry, I needed to learn it from the ground up. So that's exactly what we did. Then by the time I was 23, maybe 22, 23, I had my first Annie Ann's franchise. So I was one of the younger ones the youngest one in the country at the time to have to be a franchisee in that system, and had to close some stores and grew some more stores along the way. That's kind of what got me into it. That was effectively my first job out of college. Well, worked a drive-through Chick-fil-A,
Right, yeah,
and
got
once
it.
I had just moved over to get into running my own thing.
Well, I think franchise in my own sphere, franchising, people that have owned a number of franchise have always been maybe 2 or 3 degrees of separation away from me. So close enough where I knew that it was like, oh, you want to go to the like Planet Fitness, downtown. Like, oh, like I know some person I went to school with, like their dad owns that, and like a bunch of other ones. But I've never gotten too deep into a conversation about what it was like. So from, to somebody that is not super familiar with what franchising is like, can you explain, what it's like to get into it? And then I am curious about, roughly your experience, openings, multiple stores, closing stores, stuff like that. But just describe, I guess, brief overview, what it's like to get into it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, there's an approval process that goes through it. You have to have the right appetite to want to own your own business. And I mean, listen, especially for most, and I'll kind of boil this down to the QSR franchise space, which most of your quick service restaurants are, your McDonald's, your Moe's, your Annie Ann's, your whatever it might be. But there's a vetting process, and there's some financing that goes to that you have to have the finances to or be able to secure the financing to open up the store, obviously. You have to be prepared to get your hands dirty. I think that's what people don't realize. Most people start out with one, and they've got to be living there. 100 hours a week is what I used to spend there. I know, and know it inside and out. Um, Everything from cleaning the grease trap to selling the pretzels to making the schedules to whatever it might be. So that's a big component. And there's not many people I know that are successful franchisees that didn't kind of start there, right? Now, there's a lot of people from an investment perspective, but if you're on the operation side of things, that's about the only way I've seen people succeed with that. So you start with that, and then the franchise model in itself is generally they'll give you all the marketing, the trade secrets, the construction build out, all that kind of stuff. But where the franchise model really separates itself from a corporate structure is they can have nothing to do with the employees because of the fear of group employment, right? So they have to keep an arm's length from your employment. So you build on the back of their business model and marketing and all that kind of stuff. But then you're responsible for the employees, right? Who are 90% of the business. That's where Zignyl comes in, is like they can't provide you the tools. We were doing managing employees and bonus structures and everything on spreadsheets, checklist,
Wow.
all that kind of stuff on spreadsheets. And as I went from location 2, 3, 4, and removed myself from being in that one business 100 hours a week, spreadsheets weren't quite cutting it. So I started automating some of those processes to give me an idea of what's going on in the store when I'm not living there, i.e. Zignyl. It's the same phonetics as traffic signal. And where are the red flags, right? I've got 50 million things going on, right? I need to know what needs attention, right? Or what's going superb, right? Like when do I need to reward my employees for great behavior? When do we have some red flags that there's an opportunity for coaching? So it really fits that niche of really focusing on those hourly employees that make or break your business. They are the face. They're representing you with every customer transaction they have, whether you have one store or 1,000.
Yeah. Wow, seamless transition, man. I appreciate that. That's good. But I do have some additional because the franchise is interesting to me. So
Yeah.
we will get there. But that was really well done.
Yes. All right. Well, I
No,
didn't
you
get
kidding
to
me?
kind of go.
That's what it's about, man. You're doing it. I'm happy, so it's cool. But so that's really interesting. So as far as our, as far as like expenses, revenues, whatever, like, are you like, where do the liabilities start and end? Like, are you pretty much liable for everything, and then you're just, I don't know, licensing the opportunity to utilize their brand and their business model, and that's where it ends? Like property, for
Yeah,
example,
effectively,
like that's all on
we're
you.
responsible for the build out, for all the financing, for I mean everything, the
Okay,
payroll, all the above. They typically, and it depends on the brand, but you're typically, let's call it 7+1, so 7% of your sales are going to go back to the franchisor, and then typically a percent's also carved out for marketing, and it can be local marketing, but a flat percentage, somewhere between 7 and 10%, usually goes back to the brand of your sales. So just royalties to the brand, and they just take that, ACH it out every week
sure.
or month, depending on the brand. Yeah.
Okay, so then as far as your personal experience going from one, okay, so the context of this question is that I think going from 1 to 2 is a huge
Mhm.
learning experience versus going from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, because you're going from that single area mindset, that single store, those number of employees, to then, like you're speaking to, then you have two. Now you have two spaces, just from my perspective, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just from my perspective, that seems massive versus like, okay, I already knew how to do two, now I can do six, type of thing. So I'm just curious, like,
Yeah.
what was that like to go from 1 to 2? And is there another benchmark,
Yeah.
going from like 10
I think
whatever?
there is. I think you got 1, 5, and 10, and then kind of beyond that, it's just replicating scales of 10. Now, I'll
Okay, cool.
tell you why. So 1 to 2, though, you're 100% correct. Especially depending on some people want to do two different brands, or maybe a geographic. There's a large bridge geographically, right? I mean, my 1 to 2 was just one side of town to another in Nashville at the time, so not that big of a deal. Then my third one was in Chattanooga, which was an hour and a half away. But 1 to 2 is a big jump because now you're genuinely delegating, right? When one, I live there, I know everything that's going on inside and out. When you get to 2, now you've got to have a manager. You can't be two places at once, right? If somebody calls out at both locations, well, you're just not going to be open at one of the to, right? That's a decision you didn't have to make previously. So it's really kind of starting to learn to delegate to a more sophisticated hourly employee that hopefully in a perfect world you've brought an employee and groomed an employee location one that can then continue the progress you've made there while you go open location two and so
Got
forth
it.
and
Yeah.
so on, right? But it's a very transient workforce and a very high turnover industry. So that's kind of what you run into because and the other thing I'll say is from one to two, you're not making enough money to have somebody kind of fill your role. There's no mid-level management really allotted for in that one to two
Wow.
range for most brands, right? Now and then so that's where you get your next jump. Well, I'll pause there real quick to see if you got any other questions because then your next kind of jump is it's kind of at that threshold of five
Oh
at
yeah,
that
keep going.
stage.
Yeah, I'm interested. Yeah.
Yeah, so then you get to three, four, then you can start paying managers a little bit more, and it all becomes economies of scale at that point. What I see is there's a big threshold for our clients at Zignyl from friends of mine in the industry. Once you get to that five-ish, give or take, now you've got enough money where you could pay an area director, let's call it, who's over about five stores. So you have five general managers, and your area director, you pay them $100,000 or so, depending on which market you're in. And so that's where you kind of make a decision. Am I going to get more than five? Do I want to keep growing or do I want to kind of stay around there? Because 100,000 is coming out of your pocket, right? So you could probably manage about five of them yourself, at least in the model we were in, reasonably, and still have some sort of a lifestyle. Mind you, also I got triplet kids. I got four kids, triplet boys and a little girl. So I didn't have any other responsibilities at the time I was doing this. So take that into account as well. If I'm spending 100 hours a store, so it becomes a lifestyle question once you get around that five-ish, give or take, is do I want to start bringing in, an area director or regional manager, whatever you want to call it, that can oversee kind of the cluster of five, and then you kind of continue to build from there.
Wow. I mean that seems like a real grind to get from not only 0 to 1, but 1 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
With the managing the time allocatements and also managing employees, and then also that threshold, like you're speaking to, of reaching a point where you can have a manager. As far as like, and two more questions about the franchise model. It is
Yeah.
yeah, just like when you're thinking about 5 plus, are you thinking like, okay, let's open the next five? Like financially, does it make sense to not go from 5 to 6, but 5 to 10 at one time, or is it just one, one, one?
It depends. I mean, a lot of it's kind of brand specific, and a lot of brands is to kind of circle back to your first question. A lot of brands have development territory, so they're not just going to let you say, "Hey, I'm going to open one
Okay.
Blake's Bakery here." You're going to have to sign an agreement that says you're going to open five in this 30-mile radius or whatever it might
Hmm.
be. Annie Ann's specifically is not like that, but most franchises are to
Gotcha.
where you have to sign an agreement to open five of them within a certain amount of time. So some of that's kind of the expectations are set ahead of time if you're opening new ones as opposed to purchasing
Gotcha.
existing.
Gotcha.
But I think that generally speaking, just like with anything else, I think the idea is to continue to grow, right? I mean, as long as you can, once you get to that five and you get an infrastructure in there with you, now you can really stand back and look at it from a macro perspective a little more. You shouldn't have to be covering shifts and things of that nature at that point anymore. You go in and work on Black Friday and you got to be present in the stores, but none of the stores should require you to have the lights on at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Awesome.
And now what I have seen and what I'll say is it's quality, not quantity, right? And I made the mistake of trying to be too aggressive and growing too quick for the sake of getting another unit that ended up costing me more money than it made me. And it may have made money and made a profit, but could my other stores have made more of a profit if they had more of my time? So I think a lot of times people are so eager to grow and it's not a level playing field as far as what each store is going to put to the bottom line. Even if the sales are apples to apples, the grass is always greener on the other side type thing. And what we have done for the 45 stores we own now is we've actually found ourselves being much more deliberate, downsizing in a lot of times, and stores selling some stores off and just focusing on the high volume stores.
Yeah.
You don't always have that opportunity out of the gates, right? But as people grow, I see a lot of people getting overly eager to grow for the sake of having more stores. That doesn't always equate to more net income.
Yeah, right. Well, that was my last question about it, was like your experience. I don't know how many you've done now, but what was your first experience actually closing one of your locations?
Yeah, it's actually I'm looking out the window here in Nashville, where I'm down here visiting for some meetings. Now I live in Memphis, but it was right down the road. The mall went under. I was around when specifically we're in enclosed malls and things of that nature, and I was in during all this. I guess it was 2015 or so, when you kind of really had a hump with that. And what we see now is when the online surge came along, that really hit a lot of the malls, right? And what happened ultimately was the bad malls went away, and the good malls, I think, are getting better because the market's not so saturated anymore. But shoot, I closed the store a couple months ago because it didn't make sense to keep it open right in the portfolio. So it obviously hurts a lot more early on, right? I had to close one within a couple years of getting into it and dig myself out. But when you have a highly successful store, you don't take it so personally. I think if you only had one store and I close it, then I'm a failure, right? I mean, that's what I tell myself. But I think now it's more of I look at it as more of a business
Sure.
decision, and I would tell my younger self to take it the same way. It's a business decision, right? I mean, there's no company I've met in the world that opens and stays successful at every single
Right.
location they've
Right.
opened, and that doesn't soil that doesn't speak to them as a business or them as a person for making those
Yeah.
decisions. Economic trends come and go, and parts of town and geographic trends come and go as
Yeah.
well.
Well, that's why I appreciate you continuing to dive into that, because I think that's such a beautiful lesson.
Yeah,
It's not
it's
take it
just
so
more of a
hard
matter
on
of fact
yourself.
a good business decision
Yeah.
to swallow a little pride and move on.
Yeah. So, well, we made it. So I appreciate you indulging. We made it. So Zignyl. So you started writing code about 5 years ago. And you were your own first use case. So what was the process of adopting it internally first, and how many stores did you have at that point?
So this is when I think I had 4 or 5 stores that we started on it.
Okay.
And the use case was I had the where it all started from was I pay, and it's actually still kind of one of the core features of Zignyl that people love so much is I would tell my employees that, hey, if we hit, say the goal for the day is $1,000, just for easy math. If we do $1,100 for the day, so if we supersede our forecast for the day by 10%, everybody's going to earn an extra quarter per hour. Right now, this was years ago, so now it's more like $1 per hour.
Yeah. Right.
But helping aggregate and calculate those bonuses, right? I mean, I was spending hours a week per store on a spreadsheet to say, okay, Blake worked 4.25 hours this day, and just doing the math on it, seriously. So the first thing we did was I started automating the polling process and pulling in the files, and found a developer who would write code to just calculate that one very simple number, which a lot goes into it, right? So off the cuff, it was just replacing spreadsheets with algorithms effectively to help calculate bonuses. And then that worked really well. So I said, well, shoot, maybe I should make sure I'm scheduling accurately everywhere, since we're already having to forecast to tell people when we're going to bonus them. Then, well, let's put a forecasting mechanism in here. Okay, well, now that we know how to forecast accurately, let's make sure we're scheduling right to the hour based off that forecast, right? And it's like, oh, well, now that we're doing that, let's make sure we're marking. Why don't we just mark our task on here as well, right? And well, why don't we just let them communicate in group chat through the app as well? And it just kind of grew, on a needs basis from one function to another to help run the business, right? This is kind of the core functions of the business, right? Sales, labor, and operations, effectively. And we don't get into cost of goods sold. There's strategic reasons we do and don't touch other parts of the business, but just the core parts of the business is what I'm really big on helping with.
So how long was the development internally before you reached a place where you said this, like the feature thing, I want to test this feature, I want to see how it's going. How long was that
Mm-hmm.
process before you said, I want to try to implement this in stores or franchises that are not mine?
Yeah, I would say, the first year or two was just my stores with just like kind of the idea in the back of my mind that if this works well, maybe there's a business here as well,
Uh,
right? And then, so about year two, I was like, oh, well, I'm going to put a little more money in this and we're going to commercialize it, right? Well, that wasn't quite that easy. So I went through 2 or 3 development shops. I do not write code. I mean, I understand how the database is working. I know enough to speak halfway intelligently to a non-technical person
yeah.
about it, but that's
Okay.
about it. So we went through a couple of offshore and onshore development teams, and a lot of learnings as far as moving from not just one point of sale integration to now multiples. So to answer your question, we thought we were going to commercialize it, and of course, for about a year, it took about 3 or 4 about 3 to really get that done. And a lot of that was not just building and developing the code properly, it was getting the accreditation needed to get the partnerships with the point of sale systems, right? And the case studies and partners. So I mean, it was obviously easy for me to get them from my own store, but if I wanted to go get a partnership with Toast, I mean, that in itself took close to 2 years
Wow.
of working back and forth with them and getting recommendations, accreditations, all that kind of stuff. So um, very, and it's worth it now though that we've built some great partnerships with it, right? So it wasn't just a matter of writing the code; it was writing the code and getting access to the required information that we need.
Yeah, well then, as maybe you could guess, given the name of the podcast, but something extremely interesting to me is that now that you did those development processes and you worked with those teams and stuff like that, how was it you went about getting your very first customers, your very first adopters?
Well, I would say that the first ones were fairly well. It was different because I had a personal relationship with them as fellow
Yeah,
franchisees, so I kind of seen them throughout the market and stuff like that, and that helped in the respect of it was obviously easy to pick up the phone and talk to
yeah,
them,
yeah,
right? But it also kind of took it from a friendly relationship to now they're a customer of
yeah.
mine and have expectations of me and Zignyl, which is a new software, and without fail, there's going to be bugs, and not
Yeah.
everything's going to be perfect out of the gate. So we kind of set in that area with people that were very tolerant, and they saw the outcomes, they saw the rewards and the sales going up, but everything wasn't just perfectly smooth, obviously, right? So we had to iron some of that out, and luckily that was with some people who I had a pre-existing relationship with, and that's kind of who we had for a year or so, probably, right? It was
Okay.
just close circle friends who kind of kept it within the brands, and then after that, then we genuinely started getting some inbound calls and sales,
Really?
from Jersey Mike's, coffee, things of that nature, and all that has been referral based, effectively, not effectively, it has been referral based, because what I like to say is in the franchising community, think of franchises no different than stocks, right? I mean, people want to diversify their portfolio. So even though there may people start out in Annie Ann's, some people own Annie Ann's and a Dairy Queen, or an Annie Ann's and a Scooter's Coffee, or whatever. So now we start kind of jumping from, or Annie Ann's and Cinnabon is a big one, right? So now we start jumping from one brand to another, and it becomes the best practice in that brand, and kind of spreads like that. So that's what I always kind of refer to as cross pollination, because your more successful franchisees, which I didn't hit on earlier, back to franchising a little bit. Yeah, they treat them once you get to a certain size, and once you get to about five or so, then you start thinking, well, do I want to hedge my bets and continue to grow with this brand, or do I want to maybe bring another brand under the fold, to just like a mutual fund, effectively?
So then, as a franchisor, Signal's able to work with whatever brand someone ultimately wants to bring under. It's just the underlying
Yes.
operations that you
Yeah, and
work with.
that's one of our selling points is that when you if you own two brands, right, you probably have two point of sale systems and two back of house systems and stuff. And we're able to normalize all that data so you have a common place to log in. I have customers who have maybe six point of sale systems under their umbrella of brands that we're able to normalize all that data. They see all the information from one spot.
Wow.
And now with the AI edition, we're even getting to the point where I don't care if you use my scheduling platform or the Paychex point of sale, or excuse me, the Paychex payroll scheduling platform. It doesn't matter to me. We can give you the same outcomes pulling that data from anywhere. Where in the previous generation you had to use Signal for scheduling and forecasting. Now we're able to kind of pull it from everywhere and still incentivize your employees and grow your business. Then that's all kind of AI based, but all on the learnings, the foundation we built with our own in-house product.
Yeah, man. Well, genuinely, I mean, that, like you putting it that way sounds, is actually just like exciting, because my family, I have a decent amount of experience in the restaurant industry, not necessarily the fast food and stuff like that, but I mean, if exposure to so many different beginnings or openings of restaurants and
Mm-hmm.
the conversation around point of sale and like how to process invoices, payments, stuff like that is crazy. So to think that, it doesn't to think that that's a barrier given partnerships with brands and stuff like that seems awesome. So that is really cool. So I'm curious, so you mentioned like when you first got into franchising, it was it was a different type of entrepreneurship in the sense that you still had to do all the shit about running a business, like all of that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that, you can't get away from that. But there is a brand that you are licensing and a business model that you're building on top of. And now what you're doing
Mm-hmm.
with Signal is entrepreneurship without that. Like you're building your own brand and you're building your own business model. So how has your experience been, in this type of entrepreneurship, franchising versus now, full time with Signal?
And it's nothing belittling to franchising, but it's a whole nother level of a startup is a whole nother level of
Yeah.
entrepreneurship.
Okay.
There's no playbook. I mean, I've been through some accelerators and stuff, and then there's, I mean, from fundraising to kind of learning the hard way from an IT perspective. I have a tech company now, and I'm not really don't have a technical background. That's not my thing.
Right.
So I've learned along the way. So it is a school of hard knocks for sure. that we are still in the thick of figuring out. But I'm like to think that we've kind of made it over the hump, and there's a lot of attrition between people that think they can do this and get to where we are today. We have yet to arrive, but I'd like to think that we're getting right there to where the ball's going to start rolling, or the snowball's going to start going downhill at some point. Shit, it has to. But it is a whole nother level of risk and unknowns and variables and reward, hopefully on the back end of it as well, right? The from just not again, not to belittle the franchise entrepreneurship stuff and
Right,
what I
right.
did there, but there's no playbook with what we're doing now, and obviously much more risky, and greater reward, right? But the way I look at it is I look at my Annie Ann's as my nest egg, if you will, which has allowed me to swing for the fences with Zignyl,
Sure.
right? Would I do this, especially with the family stuff now, without having, for lack of a better term, a nest egg with my franchises? I can't say that I would.
Yeah. Well, so then three final questions for about where you're at now, because I know the reason that you're in Nashville is, I mean, because things, you're getting closer to that point where it's going to start going downhill, and you have the momentum, and
Mhm.
a lot of really cool things. So for where you're at now, we talked about, I mean, we did. I don't know if there was a time period between when some of people in your close circle were utilizing it, and then you got some inbound sales, and then you onboarded those customers, and now you're in a place to expand. But as far as thinking about where the company is now and your growth strategy for whatever time period you're thinking about it in, next couple of weeks, months, a year, I don't know. But I'm just curious,
Mhm.
like, specifically how you're approaching growth for Zignyl, given or Ziggy AI, given where it's at.
Yeah, and I think specifically with the Shift AI and the way that where we've really pivoted is to normalize all this data, right? I think that our growth and expected most of our growth will come through partnerships. So we have great partnerships with Toast Point of Sale System, with Paychecks, payroll. So we are a value add to a lot of the staple products that our customers are using. So while we get a bunch of inbound, and we obviously do the outbound cold lead sequences as well. As we grow, we really want to lean into our partners where we can be added value for them and vice versa for the core functions they have to have in their business. Outside of being a natural progression and make a ton of sense for the end customer, it's great for me because our there's obviously reciprocal commissions that come off that, but they are just that, right? And I'm not having to pay a full-time sales force if I can grow in that method. It's all a variable cost that goes with sales. So that's where I think I see the most growth coming from, and I think the most potential and sensible and everything. I think that's where it'll come from.
Cool.
That, and we spend a lot of time on we call a flywheel of content, right? Things like what we're doing right now in articles. Now, I speak at a lot of conventions as a franchisee because I'm solving my own problem. So really want to continue
Ah,
to work to place myself as a thought leader in the space because that's what I do and that's where this all came from. I haven't honestly found a ton of value in the traditional magazine ad marketing
sure.
and don't and referrals and customers speak for themselves and speak volumes. So, I mean that's kind of the way we're looking to grow.
So is the approach to establishing those partnerships similar to like a, I'm just curious with, because it's a growth strategy in itself, but I'm thinking, like, as far as initiating those partnerships, is there still an aspect of cold outreach, or is there another channel for accessing, like, is it more structured, because there's a lot of people looking for partnerships with those companies? I don't know, if like a form submission, like, I don't know.
Those partnerships are pretty well structured. I mean, what you're finding in the ecosystem today, like Solink, is their little cameras that tell you people are stealing in your store. They tap into your camera system, and so there's a bunch of reciprocating partnerships, right, where they can benefit from Ziggy being a customer, and Ziggy genuinely adds a
Right, right.
value add for their client, and likewise, right? There's not many, well, there's just not many, if any, one way partnerships. There's nobody out there just looking to sell Ziggy for me for the fun of it because they think it's good. But if I'm
Yeah.
working with Paychecks, a payroll company, and they can ask my AI agent, hey, when is Susie not showing up for work most frequently? Right. That's a value add to their client as well. And so it's good for the greater whole. So it's definitely getting creative with how you can work with other solutions, right? And kind of getting creative with what that looks like. But I'm not talking anybody into being a partner with Ziggy, nor are they talking me into being a partner with them. It's pretty clear cut, as far as it needs to be mutually beneficial or it's
Right.
a waste of everybody's
And
time.
then the way that you get introduced to them is either cold outreach or some
Well,
introduction.
from a partnership perspective, it's always almost always because one of my clients or one of my clients uses their service as well and
Got
says,
it.
could they not talk to each
Yeah,
other?
yeah, I heard.
Or vice versa, right? One of their clients uses it and they say, oh, I wish I had this one. So, well, can we
Yeah,
put these two together? We're already using them both anyway.
cool. Well, two final things for you. This has been so cool, so awesome. I appreciate all of the perspective that you're bringing. I'm curious, one, what is the greatest hurdle that you are facing at the moment, and how is it, also an opportunity for you?
Yeah, I would say right now, well, I'm going to give you the greatest hurdle that we've solved within the last six
Let's
months,
do it.
right? And it was going from a team of being a solo founder in a tech space where when I'm just kind of overwhelmed, to say the
Yeah.
least, with workload, not to mention learnings on the fly, right? So I think that finding the right people to surround yourself with was is a huge concern. And I'm not talking about people that you can go get a staffing agency to find for you, right? I'm talking about people who want vested equity in the company because they believe in the company. And that's what I've been fortunate enough to find. A repeat founder, Mary Paul Thompson, here's in Nashville. That's who I've been down here meeting with today, who's amazing at the business development. She just exited a company in the adjacent space. And then Jaffe, who's our technical co-founder, right? Bringing him on board, like that's been just exponentially like impactful for the business. But it took a long time. I had to go to Silicon Valley and do the whole accelerator thing and raise some capital from there as a solo founder. So it took some time for me to get some accreditation from that community where they'd want to join the team, honestly, right? Or where they would even know what Ziggy is. So biggest thing by far is surrounding yourself with the right people. And I'm not talking about people, like I said, the biggest thing is not people you can hire and just write a check for, people who genuinely believe that being a part of this company and having equity in your company is more valuable than a dollar amount
Yeah,
at the
yeah, yeah.
time, and then present value amount.
Well, congrats. That is definitely a hurdle and absolutely an
Yeah. And
opportunity.
it's been exponentially more fun for me selfishly,
Yeah,
and more, it's made it more fun for me to where I'm not just buried on my head and I can do what I'm good at and they can do what they're great at. And it's already bearing a lot of fruit for Ziggy, like
yeah.
instantaneously almost.
Well, lastly, I'm curious, and it could be something big, it could be something small that happened today, however you want to go with it, but I'm curious what inspires you.
Winning, success, like I don't have like a chip on my shoulder or anything, but I want to show that like that I can create something that my kids will be proud of me for it. I'm not talking about dollar figure, just winning and being successful at something, and making an impact, I guess is what it comes down to. Not the dollar amount so much as making an impact. I have a huge philanthropic component of this, that is I like to bring what I call blue collar to white collar workers, right? I think with the prevalence of AI, I think that it's really going to level the playing field, regardless of your educational background, because everything's going to be on human soft skills, because all the intelligent components of it, right, and all the administrative work and all the math and all that stuff, that's going to be done by AI, because it can be done by AI better than we could anyway. So I think it's really going to level the playing field, regardless of where you came from or what your educational background was. To people are going to be judged on their soft skills, right, and their communication and their in-person skills again. So I just want to make an impact on that, right, and that's what I like to do, is I like to winning, success, making an impact, right. That's what's exciting to me about it.
Awesome. Well, Matt, that sounds great. Well, yeah, clearly you're doing a great job. So this is super cool. I appreciate you taking, out of your insane schedule, the time out to have this conversation. If somebody is interested in following you or the journey of the company, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, just run to Ziggy.ai. Ziggy.ai is our site. It just launched. Actually, it may not be live till tomorrow, but it's going to launch this week. So by the end of the week, go there and check it out. And yeah, I would love to talk to you. We always love, even if you're not a potential customer, we always love feedback and thoughts from the deskless employees and across the board. So love to hear from people.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing an update in a couple months.
No, this has been great. Thank you.
You got it. See ya.